It's okay. So my name is Anna Cabot, and I teach at the UConn Law School. Can everyone hear me in the back? Okay, I need to speak up a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to be talking specifically about sanctuary cities and the efforts, one of the efforts, the efforts against potential changes to the immigration system or the efforts against current policies really need to happen on a lot of different fronts, right? But I'm going to focus on sanctuary cities right now. And I'm going to look to try and answer, as a lawyer, I get to do like technical stuff, which is not the most fun. But I'm going to look to answer like 4 questions in the next few minutes. One, what does a sanctuary city look like? What is it? It's definitely not the same all over the country, but what are the kind of foundational policies of a sanctuary city? Secondly, what has the Trump administration been threatening to do to municipalities who become sanctuary cities or who are sanctuary cities? 3, can they do that? What they plan to do. And 4, briefly, are we alone in these things? So, as a lawyer, I'm just talking about my own opinion. I'm sorry, that's over. Anyway, so the first question really is, what is a sanctuary city and how does it help? My colleague Lucas just talked about immigration raids. And those are really awful tools of the immigration agency in the United States. And I just want to put this up front. Sanctuary cities do not help with that. There's a lot that sanctuary cities do not do. The idea of sanctuary, the word sanctuary, especially here we are in a church, implies this intense physical protection, and that is not what sanctuary cities are. The kind of core idea behind sanctuary cities, and it includes lots of kind of other things, but one of the core ideas is kind of disentangling or decoupling local law enforcement from federal immigration enforcement. And so, as my colleague was talking about, this can be this entanglement of the two, which, to be honest again, is largely or became much more prevalent during the Obama administration. The passing of a law named SB 1070, which was trying to enforce the cooperation of local law enforcement and federal immigration enforcement. But anyway, sanctuary cities try and disentangle these two things. It goes past just local law enforcement to other agencies of local government, but it's disentangling local government from federal immigration enforcement. And it does that through a bunch of different methods. One is restricting even the information that local government and local law enforcement can gather. So, and one of those big issues is what information can police gather when they pull you over for a broken taillight, or when they stop you for a minor traffic violation, or when you come in to complain of a crime that was committed against you. So sanctuary cities have various policies restricting when someone's immigration status can be asked of them, or asked of them, demanded from them. Some cities restrict it to, the investigation of a crime. Some restrict it to the investigation of a crime for which the immigration status is actually like a relevant thing. Some jurisdictions restrict it to, you can only ask for the immigration status of someone actually arrested for committing a crime. So there's various different ways of doing this, but restricting the amount of information both police and other government agencies who provide services can ask. So restricting government agencies from asking about immigration status unless it's relevant and necessary to the benefits provided. Okay, another issue is restricting when those agencies can disclose that information. So sometimes that information has to be gathered because it's relevant to the provision of services. But when, an ICE agent picks up the phone and calls your local town hall to ask for that information, restricting when that information can be provided to when immigration, why am I blanking on ICE? Customs and Immigration Enforcement. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That's what ICE stands for. I'm sorry if I refer to it. I get all up in here sometimes. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE, to when ICE asks for it with a subpoena or with a warrant, or somehow required when the local agency is required to give that information by law. So, once the government has this information, making it more difficult for them to give it to immigration authorities. A third type of policy is restricting when local law enforcement specifically can actually reach out to ICE to give them information about someone who they have stopped or arrested who has who has no immigration status. And finally, and kind of at the crux of a lot of this, is limiting law enforcement's cooperation with immigration officials when immigration officials want local law enforcement to arrest people and hold them in custody. And so what happens is, in just a random situation, immigration has an order of removal out for someone. They didn't show up for court, maybe they're ordered removed, who knows. Anyway, they issue an immigration detainer. When someone is stopped for anything, stopped for a traffic violation, or if they're arrested for a minor crime and they're brought into the police station, and the police, end up thinking, hey, it wasn't this guy, maybe we picked up the wrong person, or this is not a big deal, we'll release them. They check on the immigration, information and say, oh, there is an immigration detainer on this person. And if they're cooperating with ICE, they then hold this person for 48 hours, sometimes more, and then immigration officials come and pick them up and put them in deportation proceedings, or just deport them if they already have an order of removal. So basically, what the sanctuary cities do is they say, look, all other agencies of government say, in order to hold people in these circumstances, you need a warrant. You need a judicial warrant signed by an independent magistrate. Why is immigration exempt from this requirement? We should require the same standard from them that we'd require from anyone else. So basically saying, your detainer, it's nice, you call it an administrative warrant, but it meets none of the standards, so it doesn't count, go talk to a judge. It's interesting, actually, in Connecticut, this question has been addressed to some extent. In 2013, Connecticut passed the Connecticut Trust Act, which says that agents, police, correctional agents, they addressed it kind of. Let me say, they thought about it. They didn't quite reach the level that I'm talking about, but they said, the agencies, corrections, police, will not hold someone on an immigration detainer unless they have been convicted of a felony or unless they have a final order of deportation. So this doesn't quite fix the problem, but it does address it in some way. It does indicate that the leadership of this state are willing to take some steps in protecting people in this situation. So one more thing. All of these different types of policies, different localities mix and match. They don't all look the same. And in fact, the way of making policy doesn't all look the same. Some of these are just statement of policies or non-binding resolutions that have been enacted by local government. Some of them are enforceable municipal ordinances. So there's another kind of aspect of this to think about when we think of our own community. Okay, I don't know what my time is, but I'll try and keep it moving. Anyway, so now that you kind of get to the heart of the sanctuary, what is a sanctuary city? Though lots of other things can be combined with this. I know certain cities even have started funds to kind of pay for legal representation of people who are undocumented and are caught up. There's lots of other different moving parts, but these are the kind of critical elements, and I think these are the most problematic when you look at people who object to sanctuary cities. So the Trump administration has threatened to remove all federal funding from municipalities, cities, and towns who kind of manifest policies like these, who create policies like these. And according to what I've read, it would hit 4 different programs, including a program that reimburses jails for holding undocumented people, but also programs like community policing grants, community development grants, and housing grants. So obviously, federal funding for any local government is going to reach a lot of things, and a lot of things that, if you'll notice, have nothing to do with immigration. These are all, most of them, pretty unrelated. So the next question is, can he do this? Is this constitutional and is it legal? And so there's, interestingly, 2 principles of federalism. So federalism being the balance of power between the federal government and the state and local government. Something that constitutional scholars and historians and now a lot more people after Hamilton came out talk about. So these principles of federalism that get in the way of actually enforcing this are, 1, that federal officials can't commandeer local law enforcement officials or local government agents to do their job. And the second is that the federal government can't use funding kind of conditionally to make states take certain actions, or if it kind of acts like a gun to the head of the state. And by state, just so you know, cities, towns, municipalities kind of are understood to be within state power. And kind of ironically, and this is where my particular views will quite obviously bleed in, both of these principles were reinforced most recently when conservatives had a problem with progressive action. And so they kind of really got these, to hold on to certain things, and now they can be used to protect sanctuary cities. So regarding the prohibition of commandeering state officials, this was kind of recodified recently in a case called Prince v. U.S., in a decision written, yes, by Antonin Scalia, of all people. And it was a decision that overturned part of the Brady Act, which was the Anti-Gun Violence and Anti-Gun Proliferation Act. Basically, part of the act which tried to say, which the federal government tried to get local law enforcement to run background checks on people trying to buy guns. And Scalia says, no, you're commandeering them. They can't be made to enforce federal gun law. Sorry, not happening. And so likewise, in this situation, local law enforcement, kind of applying these principles, should not be able to be commandeered to enforce federal immigration law. And the other, the conditional funding aspect was most recently litigated in the Affordable Care Act litigation. So the litigation that challenged Obamacare. Basically, the only part of that act that was overturned was the part that said, look, if you state do not expand your Medicaid to include millions of more people, we're going to pull your funding for your existing Medicaid. And the court said, sorry, you can't use funding for something unrelated. So even this was deemed not related enough. You can't use funding for something unrelated to try and make the states do something different. Now, the law on this point, this conditional funding point, is not quite as good because in the past, back in '87, when the federal government was trying to raise the age of drinking to 21, I will be done soon, I'm sorry. So the federal government wanted the entire country, the age of drinking to be 21, safety reasons. And so the federal government threatened to take away 5% of any state who didn't do this, any state's highway funding. And that, for whatever reason, got through. The Supreme Court said, okay, fine. But that might have been, I'm not sure if that was so much, this is related enough or this is non-coercive enough because it was only 5%. But I think it does leave the door open a little bit, maybe. I think generally it would seem like withdrawing funding for community development and housing programs in order to get states to enforce federal immigration law is not connected enough to be able to stand up in court. So that's the good news, but that's obviously tentative and just my almost off-the-cuff assessment. So the final thing I wanted to say was we are not alone going through this debate, and I think Mark might be saying more about this. It's really hard to assess how many sanctuary cities there are out there because the definition is so amorphous, and because a lot of cities are deciding not to call themselves sanctuary cities. They're just deciding to implement these policies. But I think the guess is somewhere between 300 and 500 other municipalities are sanctuary cities in this manner. We have a lot of company in this, and I think we have a governor who's willing to go to bat over this issue, at least to some extent. So I'm going to pass you on to Mark.